And we are live, Enterprise Hits and Misses video show. I've got a retail special for you guys today, retail highs and lows with Jake Knowles of BJSS. Jake and I met last year in New York. Circumstances have dramatically changed, but we are back. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, always good to be back. Shame we can't do it in person like last year, but yeah, looking forward to catching up.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, I go to NRF every year to kick off the year in the bitter snow of New York, but it's always a fun show. And Jake was kind enough to hop in the podcast chair last year. So if you want to have a look at that podcast for a little background on last year, that's still available. But we had a really good talk, and so I wanted to bring Jake back because so much has changed. I mean, Jake, like in the Javits Center where you and I did that podcast somewhere in the basement where we found like a fairly quiet space, about 2.5 or 3 months after, the Javits Center was a hospital. And, that just gives you some idea of like what that year has been like. And Manhattan has not recovered. In fact, NRF did an online only event this year. Hello, Thomas. Glad you made it to the show early. I think this show is going to be right up your alley, so definitely keep us posted. But yeah, so I asked Jake to come back on because so much has changed. But retail is obviously like a critically important sector that we all rely on right now. And I wanted to really get his sense of like what we've learned so far and what lies ahead in a very unpredictable year that Diginomic has been calling the vaccine economy, where we're not back to normal yet, but they're a little creeping in that direction, and consumer behavior continues to confound all of us, and we're gonna get to that. And Jake's also got countdowns. This is a countdown show as usual, and he's actually got a visual prop there, so I'm looking forward to getting into his top 5 retail misconceptions and such. But anyhow, Jake, just tell us to start out with, what's it been like for you guys? I mean, you were out consulting on a ton of retail projects and then boom. So what happened?
Well, it switched overnight, didn't it? In March last year, we were there kind of working, side by side with our clients. And then overnight we were told to work from home. So there was definitely an initial shock factor. And I think retailers around the world and organizations around the world felt that, particularly for consultants like myself. I think the knee jerk reaction was, cut costs wherever possible and stop those transformation programs and those projects in their tracks. So there was probably a couple of months of a bit of a quieter time, but then it soon picked up again when I think retailers and again organizations realized that actually the way wasn't necessarily to tread water, but there were actually things to be done. And I'm sure over the next hour or so we'll talk about some of those things and that innovation that has really driven forward in the last year or so. And there's been an incredible acceleration in what's been achieved across the technology and the customer experience space, which is obviously seen COVID as the catalyst of all of that.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because last year when you and I talked, I was honing in on the theme of retail as a winners and losers market. And one reason I wanted to look at that is because, when you put aside Amazon and Walmart, who arguably have some unfair advantages, how are other retailers excelling, right, that don't have those unfair advantages? I think that's a very interesting question. But then COVID hit, and then I think a lot of retailers got punished in ways that you couldn't really blame them for, right? Like we may get into this more, but like, how do you blame Starbucks, right? They had a brilliant model, but it was not what you would call a really COVID friendly model. So suddenly the digital darlings of the retail sector took it on the chin, right? But now I think maybe we're getting back into where we can start talking. Winners and losers isn't really the right language anymore because it's not fair, and we all kind of have to help each other right now. But I think we can start to step back again and say, which retailers are really responding to this in an effective way that is good for their employees and customers, right? I mean, isn't that what it's all about right now, is to try to figure out what they're doing that's working?
100%. Yeah. And I've been really impressed by, the quick innovation that we've seen from retailers, whether that's, getting into your home through use of technology, improving delivery, driving things like social commerce, which we'll come on to as well. So I think it's not only acting fast, but it's acting fast with the value of the customer in mind. And there's innovation for innovation's sake and the successful innovation as well. So I think the amount that we've seen change so quickly and the value that it's driven to customers, I think has been astounding. I think there's probably a wider question as to did it take a pandemic for this innovation to really be accelerated, or could it have been done anyway? But that's probably a longer question that we could discuss for hours on end. So we'll focus on the positives for now.
Yeah. So, and just a reminder, anyone watching, feel free to start posting questions and comments in the chat. We will be getting to as many of those as we can. Jake, so if you had to describe in a few sort of ideas, what are the biggest changes that you think we've seen from last year's retail market to this year, 1 year into the pandemic?
So, I think we'll come on to kind of the long-lasting impact of COVID, but realistically, I think what has happened is the current state you are in, whichever way you are, whether you're declining or improving, it has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So those who were struggling and maybe, dying a death of 1,000 cuts have bled out a lot quicker than we ever imagined. So I think that's definitely something we've seen. And those that were strategically set up either, with that e-commerce channel, with that e-commerce experience and with those deliveries, they've succeeded and continue to innovate as a result. So, when we were talking, obviously, John, about kind of in-store innovation, all that kind of stuff, it's hard to talk about that over the last year because, particularly in the UK, non-essential retail has been closed for the best part of kind of 8 or 9 months over the last year. So those guys have really struggled. And either if you haven't got an e-commerce channel set up, or if you've had to set one up very quickly, it's become very, very messy and very kind of hyper competitive out there. So it's been a lot of headaches for retailers who haven't had that channel set up already. I'm sure many of us have been shouting about for a while of the importance of having not just a store channel, but an e-commerce one as well, and joining the two up. But this year has proved that, having that single store channel and using stores purely as a sales platform in its purest sense, that's just not sustainable anymore.
Yeah, I sent you a few items. I actually got some fairly interesting and one fairly shocking item in my inbox from my retail PR contingent this week. And one of the ones that wasn't really the shocking one, but was still interesting, was this whole notion of like, how do you do year over year store comparisons right now, right? Like, so, it's like we're just making progress on retail metrics, and now you kind of have to throw them out the window, right? Like, you can't really do a comp on store performance year to year right now. That wouldn't be fair.
No, not at all. Not if it's not even been open this year for that month. It's hard to do a year-on-year comparison. But I think those traditional metrics of how you measure as performance of the store are also going to change completely, because, as you said, John, that vaccine economy and the uncertainty around what's going to happen in the next 6 to 9 months. Nobody knows if customers are going to flow directly back to stores, and once everyone's got a vaccine, they're going to be pumped full of confidence to head back. I would imagine there's a bit of pent-up demand out there. We certainly saw it here between the kind of first and second lockdown, where people hadn't had a chance to go to those stores. But there's pent-up demand, and then there's sustainable demand. And I'm just not sure we're ever going to get from the first to the second, and we're never really going to go back to that full store experience. So how you measure your store as, sales by square foot being the traditional metric, I'm just not sure that traditional metric maybe is realistic moving forward.
Yeah, and I think one really interesting thing we got to last year was the importance of retail as a data platform, right? And that when we talk about experience in retail, which was like one of the hot words at last year's show, it's all about having the data to serve customers better. And now you think about like both the employee experience in retail and the customer experience, and you think about going ahead this year, and that data is going to be a big issue, right? Because now you're thinking about things like, okay, so are we going to like tell our customers that all of our in-store employees have been vaccinated, for example? Like, are we going to require testing for certain access to certain parts of the store, for example? Like, and some of this is really interesting because a lot of that data is very sensitive and regulated also. So it seems like if I had to pick one thing, there's going to be a lot of like data challenges around these retail experiences now.
100%. And there's actually rumors here of no jab, no job contracts being offered in retail and other organizations, where literally they are saying that, employees must take must have the vaccine before they can return to work because of the safe environment that it provides. Now, I'm sure that is a whole different conversation in terms of wider freedoms, but in terms of what that means for retail, like you said, there's data privacy issues there. There's kind of COVID safety regulations, but in the bigger picture, it's how do we set up stores in a way that provide that safe environment and drive that confidence back to consumers? And retailers will be thinking, if one element is we have a fully vaccinated workforce. That is one way of driving that consumer confidence and people to mull about freely in stores again. So I've no doubt it's one of the considerations for retailers.
And Bill Wood has kind of a monster question. Bill, we may have to tackle your question in some chunks as we go. What are the big trends for retailers dealing with customer sentiment, simplicity, and automation? I'm sure we'll get back to a number of those topics. Is there anything that jumps out right now, Jake, on that one?
Yeah, so I think customer sentiment's a massive one, and we'll come on to things like social commerce, but we've all heard the stats around kind of millennials and Gen Z, and they're going to start taking up over 50% of purchasing power in the US and the UK. Those generations are glued to their mobile phones, I'm sure, to the irritation of parents all over the world. But what that means is that they share their thoughts, they share their experiences all over social media, which is great because there's opinion of brands out there. But in terms of customer sentiment, there's a lot of analysis you need to be doing in that space to really understand what your customers are saying about you. Not often do they just pick up the phone to complain on customer service. Now it's a tweet, it's a post on Facebook, it's an Instagram post. So there has to be a wealth of different tools and metrics you have to use to understand your customer sentiment analysis and really make actionable feedback off the back of it. There's one point understanding the feedback. There's another thing actually, segmenting that and really understanding what to do with it. So there's a big piece there that we can digest for sure.
Yeah. And Thomas is saying employee experience versus customer experience in store is always a good point to discuss. Yeah, and Thomas, we'll probably get into that a little more. I think one of the interesting challenges is how much should it be discussed right now in terms of should retailers be spending a lot of time on in-store or not? I mean, and that's one of the questions, $1 million questions for this year. We'll get into some data on consumer sentiment on that, but I think it's a complicated question. And then Thomas also asks you, Jake, is it social commerce or commerce anywhere?
It's a good question, and maybe the two are interlinked, and we'll definitely get into social commerce. I think there was a wider piece about social commerce that isn't necessarily just this kind of commerce anywhere. For me, commerce anywhere is obviously what it says on the tin of being able to interact and purchase or view goods from retailers wherever you are and provide that kind of consistent, seamless, if you want to use the buzzword, and frictionless experience across channels. Social commerce is a slightly different entity in my opinion, because again, going back to kind of those Gen Z and millennials, and I only harp on about them because of the purchasing power that they have. But actually, for a lot of them, it's shopping with friends and shopping in that community feel, which isn't just social anywhere. So there's already startups in Asia. People like obviously Alibaba are streets ahead in terms of that live commerce, and the stats around their Singles Day are mind blowing. But there's actually apps out there already. I think it's called Pinduoduo, which offers group discounts for shopping with your friends. So it's really trying to encourage that group shopping online to try and replicate that in-store experience of kids walking around malls or department stores or shops in big groups, because that's what they appreciate doing and they get positive reinforcement from their friends. How do you recreate that online? And that's through social commerce, which in Asia is streets ahead to where we are, particularly in the UK and probably the US as well. So I think that's the nuance to social commerce compared to that social anywhere, in my opinion.
In just a minute, we're going to get into Jake's countdown of top 5 retail misconceptions, and he has a prop as well, which is great. We got some visual props this week. One more thing I wanted to get into with you, Jake, before we do that is I think there's a couple of really fascinating trends. I mean, one is kind of obvious, I think, which is that brand loyalty is really, there's a big wrench been thrown in brand loyalty in a sense, because so much of COVID was about figuring out the best way to get the stuff you wanted. And if your brand was out of stock on a supermarket shelf, or if you get a different brand online, you switched. So I think brand loyalty definitely took a hit. That's one thing that really comes to mind. The other thing I think is really interesting is, like, if you're a retailer and your product was in demand, then all you really had to do was to figure out how to deliver it to consumers or in-store pickup or whatever, so-called safer options. That's a hard problem maybe to figure out whether you want to play with Amazon or do some other. But the point is, it's a solvable problem. The demand is there. I'm fascinated by some of the retail segments where the demand started to dry up and they had to literally reinvent their business models, right? So you think about certain luxury brands where people are used to going in store before to try something on, an expensive watch or whatever. And now suddenly you're thinking about, well, what do we do? And And I think that's really interesting because some of those brands are perhaps driving what you might call innovation around things like VR and AR and, trying stuff on like, in a virtual way or whatever. So I think it's really interesting to look at some of those brands where the demand wasn't so high and what did they do,
Yeah, and it actually comes back to that employee experience point and actually the role of the in-store associate, because before it was, go and pick something from the back or, where can I find this? Now it's actually really in that salesperson role. And there's actually a company called Hero, run by a chap called Adam Levine, that actually connects the individual shopping on their mobile or kind of tablet, anything like that, with that in-store associate to really provide that in-store experience. You're not just chatting to a customer service agent or, our favorite chatbot, but actually an in-store associate, an expert in the product who can talk you through it. So they're really trying to replicate that in-store experience online because, yeah, like we said before, John, going to buy, a luxury watch or a luxury handbag, spending $5,000, $6,000, more often than not, you're going to want to go and see that, feel it, and talk to an expert about it. At least with things like Hero and similar startups, you can at least engage with those experts and have that conversation as well. And there's all sorts of great initiatives already around that AR and VR and things like that. I think IKEA is a massive one. So being able to, you can place that sofa in your home on your mobile device, see what it looks like, do all the measurements, things like that. Again, trying to bring the technology into your home. And again, the other one in that sector is beauty, which is people like L'Oreal as well. So probably not for me and you, John, but how you can try makeup on and check your style on your face and get the right shade for your skin, all those different things, again, that traditionally you go to a beauty hall, to a Sephora to try on. How do you do that and have the confidence to make, it's a purchase of $40, $50, it's still a sizable amount of money. How do you have the confidence to do that in the safety of your own home? And that's through that innovation as well.
Yep. All right, well, let's go through some of your misconceptions. I'm going to change the camera view so people can see it better. Jake's going to hold a couple of these up. If you can't quite see him, he's going to read them for you as well. So pick one of the misconceptions for us.
Okay, we'll start from the bottom. Okay. So number one is personalization is the only way to success. So I know personalization is a huge buzzword out there, and I'm never going to challenge that it is, of course, a huge component and a value add to the customer experience. But for me, it's definitely not the silver bullet that some people make it out to be. We talk about that huge amount of data, the AI that can obviously process data and provide insights quicker than, any human can. But for me, there's a lot of other elements to a successful customer experience. We talk about things like convenience and speed and ease of purchase. Again, going back to those buzzwords of frictionless and seamless. But for me, they are just as important as personalization. You can have the most personalized experience and, get that size that you're looking for and that recommendation, all that good stuff. If it takes me 15 clicks to get there, it has a hidden shipping cost at the end, and it's actually going to take 15 days to get to me, then the personalization is entirely irrelevant. So not going to argue that it's definitely important, but I feel that there's a lot of other different components to a successful customer experience, and that maybe sometimes personalization is slightly over-egged in its importance because there's a lot of other barriers to a customer experience.
I'm actually going to use a sound effect for that one, Jake, because you just made my day. So we're going to give you the applause here.
I'll take it.
I think that was worth the price of admission right there. I mean, I've been writing about hyper-personalization on my blog of late. Feel free to check that on Diginomica. But I totally agree with you. And I think one of the other things I would add with personalization is that I don't think the tech is generally there yet for a lot of the scenarios. It is for some. I mean, obviously, like some of the stuff with Amazon and Netflix or YouTube where they're really good at showing you related stuff. Okay, fine. But in general, I think companies overreach with personalization and they think they know me a lot better than they do, right? So, I just bought, the last piece of luggage I'm going to need for a long time. Been seeing luggage ever since. And, not only is that not helpful, but it actually makes me less impressed with you. It makes me less trustful of you. So I think that's the other thing I would add about personalization is it's not even like broadly achieved yet in a satisfactory manner, in my opinion. So
yeah, it can be clumsy. It can sometimes be a bit over invasive as well. And it's a real fine balance. So yeah, definitely other things to focus on, in my opinion.
Thomas, you said frictionless is a good one. Frictionless process or frictionless experience. Yeah. I mean, I think, frictionless is one of those terms that I use with some caution, though, to be fair. Diginomica has a frictionless enterprise model, so we have jumped in on that. I view it as aspirational, but I think it is interesting to think about where the weak links are. And one thing about the COVID economy is I think it's exposed some of the weak links, right? Like in ways that we didn't quite realize, because in the past, if I had to go in and swipe a credit card, maybe that wasn't a big deal, but maybe it is now. I mean, Europe is a lot further ahead with hands-free payment tech than the US. And that's an example of something that really got exposed, where it was like, well, it's no big deal. They hand my card over. Well, suddenly it's kind of a big deal, you know? So I think it's interesting how that happens.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think that again, I'm trying to answer Thomas's question now. I feel like frictionless process underpins the frictionless experience. So I'm intrigued by the number of clicks it takes to make a purchase on a website, why you abandon your basket, how you make sure the customer has the right information before they get to that purchasing decision. All those different things are really, really intriguing to understand that customer journey. And some people want to browse and get inspiration and choose different products. Other people know what they want, know when they want it, and want to go and achieve that. And you have to be able to accommodate for both.
Indeed. All right, let's see your next one. Let's do number 4.
Number 4. There we go. So store and e-commerce sales will rebalance after the pandemic. So again, I think there's a lot of thought out there around how, stores still have a part to play, which I completely agree that they do, and that maybe e-commerce isn't quite ready for the kind of dominance that I think we'll see in a few years. I would disagree with that, and I'm sure some other people will as well. And I think certainly what we've seen in the pandemic is people have been forced to shop online, whether that's your groceries, whether that's your clothes, etc. And people who were maybe reticent about technology before, maybe had some misconceptions about it, have actually found it is a bit easier, and to have something delivered to your door and actually using that technology is great. You know, who'd have thought we'd have 60, 70, 80-year-olds on Zoom calls and Skype calls? And, you know, I'm sure it was a bit dodgy to begin with, but even they've realized that this technology is easy to use. So I think that shift has been accelerated by COVID, and I think we'll get that return to stores a little bit, but I think that e-com swing is here to stay. And I think in January, the retail sales in the UK just came out, and e-com's now a third of all sales in the UK now. So I think it might drop again, but you know, we were looking at kind of 8 to 12% before the pandemic, and you can see where it's gone now, and I feel like it's going to stick, because I think people have realized the convenience and the ease of shopping online. And really seen the benefits, particularly people who haven't used it before.
Jake, you know what the other thing too is, I think like what has been underestimated by some is just the length of time this has gone on has really enforced habits, right? So like I was someone who never used delivery or pick up stuff for groceries, and I'm just to roam the store kind of a guy that I like doing it. I don't find it inconvenient, but I went shopping for the last time, I think last March, in a store, and I just got creeped out by the whole experience. Like seeing empty shelves freaked me out. The way people were behaving, these weird lines people had to go through, and of course that's gotten more strict. And then I think I caught some nasty bug that day that wasn't COVID, but I was like, the hell with this. But, you know, the first few months ordering and delivering was a little bit choppy for me. There were a lot of glitches. But as I worked it out and as the services got better, I got more used to it. And now I started to think like, yeah, maybe that's a permanent habit for me. I don't know. But that has enormous implications, right, for retailers, especially when you consider that my grocery bill has dropped. Now, I don't know if that's true for everyone who orders delivery, but I do think there's a stumble factor shopping in person, right? And so you have to think about, well, how do you duplicate the stumble factor, and how do you make that happen in a way where I could just throw stuff in my cart? I think it's really interesting how the length of time of this pandemic has, I think, really changed this conversation. Yeah,
100%. And it's the shopping online with grocers, but there's also kind of the DIY meal kits as well. I never thought, you know, my parents now order a weekly box and it comes with the recipes prepared and they make it themselves. My dad's cooking for the first time in 30 years, and you never thought you'd see it, but they've realized the technology's there. It's easy to do. It lands on the doorstep. It's all there. So why wouldn't you? And like you said, John, people are at different starting points. You know, I now get my groceries delivered through Ocado 9 o'clock every Sunday morning, and have done for the last year, and it lands on my doorstep and I know what I'm getting and it's perfect. Whereas you know, you are maybe a slower adopter, but you're starting to see the benefits as well. So all got different starting points, but I feel like it's all heading in the same direction.
Ouch, a frictionless experience is not memorable, isn't it? Says Thomas. Thomas, perhaps, but I think over time, if you accumulate frictionless experiences, I think that's good for your brand. I think because I think what is memorable is a non-frictionless experience, a wildly inconvenient experience. So that'd be my answer to that.
It depends what you're looking for as well. If you know what you're getting and you know what you're going for, and that's that frictionless. Amazon, I might order the same product, a couple of times, some breakfast bars, protein bars, things like that. I go on there, I click that buy it now option. I've clicked twice and it's on my doorstep the next day. So that's memorable for me, for sure.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I remember the first time I accidentally I was ordering like some walnuts or something, and suddenly it was my local Whole Foods was integrated, and I wasn't even planning on that. But then like 2 hours later, I had groceries, which was unheard of. And so, like that was like memorable. But okay.
Might have lost John for a second there. I'll see if I can answer your question in the meantime. I think John might have accidentally clicked the wrong button. So Bill, John's back. There we go. I was just reading out Bill's question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Until COVID, there was a steady trend towards mass customization. And although far away, it's been trending, whether it's a personalized customer experience or a tailored good or service. How has this been impacted by COVID?
Your answer?
Yeah. So, I mean, that trend's not going away, that mass customization. And particularly in the e-commerce space, as we said, those retailers who are, bricks and mortar pure plays are now moving online, which means that online experience is even more competitive. What I would say is there are multiple ways to customize that experience and be personalized. It's not necessarily just through recommendations, which I think is, sometimes a bit of a trap. Sometimes it's not just through personalized recommendations. It might be understanding where people want to get it delivered, whether it's, a click and collect, whether it's the right size. There's a lot of different ways to drive that personalization rather than just through recommendations. So I think it's still moving in that direction. And I still think it's a massively important thing, particularly as things like e-com are even more competitive after the pandemic.
All right, let's see your third retail misconception there.
Okay, no problem. So the high street and malls are dead. So the high street, which is obviously kind of your more traditional UK high street in your leafy suburbs, not necessarily in London, definitely have suffered. Obviously, those kind of much smaller retailers without that e-com presence and without those, those huge fulfillment centers that have certainly struggled. And obviously those malls, John, I always think of Hudson Yards and visiting that last year and just being overawed at the sheer size and scale of it, and just imagining that being an absolute ghost town for the last 12 months as well. What I would say is in their current forms, I feel like they will always struggle, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're dead. It means they will evolve. So I'll take high streets as the first instance. In the UK particularly, and you can back me up if it's the same in the US, John, there's definitely that shop local and shop independent and support your local independent retailers, a bit of a movement around that in the UK. So things like high streets, I think will always have a place for that. But I think for high streets, it's about thinking what that community needs. So what is that destination, and why would you go to that high street? Is it for the gyms, the restaurants, the bars? What are those different partnerships and retailers can almost provide that experience for people that isn't just about going to purely buy something. Actually, the purchasing should be incidental based on the overall destination of the place. So I think that's really interesting, because I think high streets in their current format might be struggling, but they're definitely not dead, because they'll change. And I think malls are the same. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, John, because I know Hudson Yards, I remember seeing there was a co-working space there. There was Camp, which was the kids retailers. There's the Mercado Little Spain downstairs, which all feel like destinations, but at the same time, there's a lot of square footage going to big retailers as well. So again, I see that as shifting to a destination, and you've got to share that square footage. I wonder whether maybe malls of that size are really going to struggle to really fill that space and, still become a destination, but still be able to pay the mortgage and the bills at the end of the month as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I tend to agree with your misconception, though. I do think that there's certain malls that are just cursed based on their location and demographics and stuff, and they're going to have to just close down. And we've seen some of that. But I think it's really more that certain retailers with heavy mall presence could be in trouble, and we've seen some of them go bankrupt and of course, bankruptcy doesn't mean the end in retail, but like is like Toys R Us finally done now? It's still waiting. But one thing I noticed before the pandemic when I was at my local mall, which I don't go to that often, is I noticed a whole lot more stores that seem to be more about quote unquote experiences, if you will. Like massage places, dental places, gyms, it seemed like there was more of a mix, right? Of like, yeah, you can go pick up your shoes, which of course shoe stores are always going to be a mainstay of a mall, right? But then also these other things where there's like a virtual reality thing where you could like ride roller coasters and stuff. And that was a pretty fun one because I wanted to do like this dinosaur virtual ride. And this woman, she was about a 70-year-old woman. She was like, "That's for babies." So then she gave me this different one. But the point is, like, there were all these like virtual things. I was like, okay, like this is sort of a mall, sort of a rethink of the mall, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe like if you're a big storefront, maybe it becomes like 2/3 warehouse, right? So, and then you have a pickup center, and then you know what I mean. So maybe you just rethink the space.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we'll get onto the role of the store in one of the lessons, so I won't spoil the surprise. But I think there's a lot you can do in terms of, like we said, those traditional metrics of kind of sales per square foot. What else can that store do? Which I think is, it's a good conversation we'll come on to for sure.
Yep. Okay. Bill asks again, how does the personalized experience or tailored online experience impact configure, price, quote technology? Are you seeing CPQ needs increase, decrease, or stay the same? That's some hardcore enterprise chops there, Bill, on CPQ, because CPQ is definitely a big deal in enterprise level conversations. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really tricky one. I think it's retailer dependent. So I think again, it's kind of understanding what that e-commerce experience you're trying to offer, whether it is to inspire or whether it is that real quick purchase journey. And I think that'll inform that CPQ technology in play.
And Thomas, I don't know, maybe you typed this while I was talking. Isn't there a longer trend for malls to include experience-like type businesses? I don't know, evidently so, based on my experiences of being told I was a baby for wanting to take a dinosaur virtual reality ride. I would say, yeah, there probably is.
I think it's dialing it back to the customer, right? So what is, either one of ourselves or, a family of four or an elderly couple, what do they want to do on the weekend? Do they want to go for a nice lunch and do some shopping afterwards? Do they want to go to the bar? Do they want to go to the gym? Do they want to go to the cinema? What are those purposes on a Saturday that means they're going to go to that destination? And as I said before, the purchasing should be a coincidental factor of that, not the main driver of it. And it's about getting people there through that destination format, and then retail is incidental off the side of it, in my opinion.
Indeed. Okay, let's see your number two.
Number two, here we go. I'm sure there'll be some discussion about this one. COVID transformed retail.
Okay. That's a misconception in your book. Interesting.
In my opinion. Again, okay. I'll caveat that every single time.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, I think the effects of the pandemic are purely an acceleration of where we would be anyway in about 8 to 10 years' time. So COVID has accelerated it for sure. And like we said before, in terms of the innovation, in terms of the product roadmaps that I'm sure retailers had that they've reined in by 5 years, it's all been accelerated. But I don't see any maybe long-term lasting effects of the pandemic that wouldn't have been seen by transformation from retail anyway. It's just happened in 2021, not 2028, 2030. So as I said before, things like retailers that were struggling, big department stores, your JCPenney's, your Sears, I'm not sure it takes a genius to work out that those guys were struggling because there's a lot of square foot there. Products weren't well merchandised. Wasn't a great place to spend time or browse. The COVID, that you can't blame COVID on that. That's just the way your store was being set up. On the other hand, retailers who have adapted quickly, who had that e-commerce well set up, who had efficient delivery, all those kind of things, they've thrived. And again, that's not thanks to COVID. That's because they've thought about their digital channels. They've been able to act with agility and adapt to new circumstances to roll out new products and services to customers quickly. And again, I think that's because of the well-placed they were either before the pandemic or how they've adapted because of it and adapted with agility. So yeah, I would argue that COVID has accelerated it, but it hasn't transformed retail on its own.
Thomas, who by the way is a CX analyst of note with his own show CRM Convos, which is well worth a view, says COVID finally brought them to the starting line. So I think he's essentially agreeing with you there.
100%.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I'm going to largely agree with you also, though. I think I would probably put a little bit of a caveat there, which is I agree with you if people's behavior goes back to normal, in the sense that if let's say 3 or 4 years from now, let's be generous on the time frame, that people no longer make choices based on either safety or inconveniences based on safety. In other words, I'm safe, but I have to wear a mask. That could affect my decision as to whether I'm going to go hang out somewhere if I don't feel like masking up, for example. So the example I would give you would be something like a Starbucks, where historically what they were trying to do is they were trying to create spaces that were kind of home away from home kind of vibe, where you would go hang out. And I thought it brilliantly anticipated a little bit of the flexible work trends that we're seeing. But if I don't feel like safe, I think that artificially excludes my decision to go there. So that needs to get retested once I feel totally comfortable. And then let's see if I go to Starbucks like I used to and hang out for the afternoon or not, or if my behavior adapts. So I think there are some exceptions to that based on things like that are more like hangout type spaces and stuff. But in general, I think especially what you're describing in terms of the disruption of the large chains and stuff, I think you're totally right. And the acceleration of VR technology referred to, like, that was coming anyway, right? This COVID just put like a huge momentum behind it. So I think 100%. You're mostly right there. Yeah.
100%. And I think, again, things like social commerce, buying through Instagram, buying through Facebook, those things were coming. It's just the fact that, now we've all been sat on our sofas on our phones. So it's just come a lot quicker than it was going to. So again, I think that's a really good example of where, that one-click buy on Instagram, and you don't even have to go through to the retailer's website anymore. That was on its way. It's just Instagram saw the traffic and how much time we were spending on our phones during the middle of lockdown, and they brought that forward, and that's why that's a mainstay now.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see your number one.
Okay, number one. Here we go. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there's a good one for you.
Amazon destroyed retail.
Okay, Amazon destroyed retail.
Okay.
And it did not.
No, again, in my opinion, Amazon did not destroy retail. And I know there are lots of stories out there about small companies that have struggled against Amazon, and I fully understand that, and lots of things around trademarks and things like that. On the flip side of that, Amazon Marketplace and the ability to sell your products through Amazon, they, according to Amazon themselves, has created 900,000 retail jobs through the ability to do that. And you think about the ability of being able to get to Amazon's customer reach, the delivery becoming Amazon's headache, all those different benefits for small businesses, I think, are massive. And then for those larger retailers as well, Amazon hasn't destroyed retail. It's set the standard for new retail in terms of how you serve customers, how you run an e-commerce platform, how you provide, next day delivery, Prime Now, within an hour, I think is here already. And in terms of the assortment and the range available, they have set the new standard for that. So yes, of course, people have been put up, struggled and fallen behind Amazon, but that's because the bar's been set so much higher by them. So I think it's unfair to say that they've destroyed retail. Understand there's some caveats of that further down the chain, but I think in general, in terms of how to, adapt, move into new industries, continue to innovate, these drone deliveries that we hear so much about, whether they're on their way or not, they've set the standard for new retail. And I think that's the important thing for me.
What's really interesting is I think I'm going to be fascinated to see if Amazon can own the so-called last mile space of logistics and getting the product directly to you. I'm being a little bit anecdotal here because I don't know for sure, but like in my town, for example, Amazon started doing a lot of deliveries that used to be done by UPS and FedEx, and essentially have been fairly unprofessional about it in the sense that it's a gig economy setup. These are not like experienced delivery drivers that have years of experience on routes and know what they're doing. These are people who are paid on volume. I had one person who deliberately canceled a delivery on Amazon because I had said I wasn't available and they were supposed to drop it off at my office location, but they needed the metric on their number. So they canceled and said I wasn't available. And then I had to reorder and just stupid crap like that. And it made me feel like there's room for some competitors around a better last mile experience. I mean, granted, it doesn't always matter if your house is easy to find and drop off, but like, especially with like, oh, I can go to your house and maybe install a product and maybe even give you advice on your fitness routine. Now last week, Laura Cesara, supply chain expert, told me she had a really good last mile experience with a third party that Amazon outsourced to. So maybe Amazon can do it. But I think to me, that's an interesting aspect because I think their last mile gig economy delivery, that's not the ultimate employee experience the way they're driving those people by volume metrics.
Yeah, 100%. And it's completely the same here, that gig economy. I think the stat I was reading the other day, I think they have to make 250 deliveries a day, which if you think about the different addresses and stuff, and it's not like a postman who has his normal round. That's some serious metrics they've got to get to, and the stories of people speeding and all sorts to try and get there, which isn't right. And I forget the name, but there's already kind of fashion retailers in the space who actually, the delivery individual will wait at your door whilst you try on the clothes and then take back straight away any clothes that you don't like already. And that's next level last mile delivery in terms of that customer service. Obviously helps your retail returns model as well, because what's coming back to you comes back to you nice and quickly. But also in terms of that customer service, I think is excellent. And like you said, transforming the role of that employee to leaving a parcel on your door to sales associate, which I think is really interesting.
So I think the way to kind of think about it in my mind is not so much that Amazon destroyed retail, though I think there have certainly been casualties, but more that Amazon creates a pretty clear parameter, and you probably shouldn't compete directly with them. You should figure out how to do something different than them, like you just described, where it's like, yeah, I'll wait. Are you saying you'll wait for me outside while I try on my clothes? Yes, I will. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And to your point, like from a returns perspective, that can actually be a pretty valuable thing to do, just because returns are so expensive for retailers and stuff. So
yeah, that visibility is amazing. And like you said, that returns headache is always a nightmare. So yeah, definitely a big opportunity.
Yeah, and what a LinkedIn user who visits a lot says his daughter will love the new returns model. Absolutely, dude. She'll wait while you try that on. You'll probably love it too, instead of having to buy all those extra clothes. So I hear you there. And Thomas brings up the drones, right? So like again, I the drones are sort of one step beyond the gig economy, perhaps, of delivery, but it's the same concept, which is a very impersonal type of service that will be highly efficient for certain things and then highly problematic for others, I think. So
100%. And it's the same with the autonomous robot delivery as well. Things like that, again, really interesting. And like you said, that gig economy going to that, but I don't think you could get less personalized than a robot turning up your door that doesn't even say good morning to you. So again, it's a toss up between the two.
Yeah. Do you tip your robot? Probably not. Well, exactly. Well, those top 5 misconceptions were really interesting. And if you guys are in the chat and you missed some of them, be sure to catch the replay. I think Jake really did an awesome job there. But in the spirit of this show, we don't just like to snark on things. We want to kind of have a look at what's actually working as well. So Jake has one more list to present to us, and this is going to be sort of top 5, sort of what tips for successful retailers. Is that how we framed it? Or
lessons, tips for success, exactly. So I'll kick off again with number 5. We'll work up to the big one.
Okay.
So there we go. Think partnerships. So again, when we talk about things like innovation, and I know it's a very scary word, and people out there think that it requires a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. One way around that is through partnerships. It's a really easy way to either gain access to a new market segment, a new technology, somebody who's already got the scale and reach that you might take 2 or 3 years to build that. So having an effective partnership strategy, I think, is really important. So one in the UK is a great example is Deliveroo, so the food delivery company. A grocer called the Co-op, which is one of the big 4 grocers, now offers grocery service through Deliveroo. So you can get your groceries delivered in the kind of anything from 20 minutes to 45 minutes. And for somebody who doesn't have an established grocery delivery model like the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, the Ocados, that takes years to build those things in terms of the fulfillment models, the vans, the infrastructure, etc. Get that partnership. Of course, it costs you a few bob in return, but you've automatically got the scale and the reach. And also someone like Deliveroo that has a great brand perception in the UK, and the reach of those customers is a great example of a partnership. And I know Walmart do the same in China with JD.com as well. So you can either buy Walmart through WeChat, or you can buy it through JD's e-commerce platform as well. So yeah, I know there's a bit of front up cost there, but you've got to, again, the trade-off between investing in innovation, waiting 2 or 3 years for it to be established versus, that immediate impact and really strong partnership model. So I think considering partnerships as a way to innovate without investing yourself into your own model, I think is a really interesting one.
Yeah, and it strikes me, especially when it comes to sort of getting on new platforms, you're going to need that, right? Because like it wouldn't be fair if only the biggest brands were the ones that were available on like the Facebook chat, right? Or WeChat, or you want to be available on those platforms also. And so probably there'll be brokers that provide that to smaller businesses, and they'll want to take their cut, but retailers are going to have to suck that up just like they deal with it now.
100%. It's exactly that. Yes, that cost benefit analysis between the two. But, if you do that right, you can really, get an effective partnership where you need it.
Got it. Okay. Let's see number 4.
Good stuff. Okay. And I know this is a phrase that Diginomica have used before, so you'll definitely recognize it. Test and learn, and test and learn. So again, innovation every single time is not going to be, the silver bullet, the 10 out of 10, the knockout punch that you need it to be. That's not what innovation is about. Innovation is about testing things, learning, and failing fast if you need to as well. And it's not just about, failure isn't just, we've lost a load of money. It's the learnings off the back of it. It's the data, it's the insights, and it's the improvement through it as well. So I think test and learning in your innovation approach is massively important. And I know this is something that your colleagues in Diginomica have spoken about, but that really requires executive and particularly kind of your CFO buy-in, because it needs almost a pot of budget to be able to do that. It can't just be, here's your budget, I want you to deliver ROI on that, because that's not what innovation is about. Innovation is about pushing the boundaries and learning from your mistakes to drive that continuous improvement. So I think test and learn is massive, particularly nowadays, John, when we are so uncertain about what the next 6 months look like. It's hard to nail your colors to the flag about what customers are going to feel and do in 6 months, whether we are wearing masks, whether we are wanting to go into stores, all those different things. So be able to test and learn and try different new things along the way means you can still make progress whilst there's still uncertainty.
So test and learn is a culture problem. To some extent, it's also a technology problem too, right? Because some technical architectures just aren't compatible with that speed of updating. So it creates some interesting crossroads for decision makers there.
Yeah, and I think one really interesting example when I was doing some homework on this, which I find incredible, is Tractor Supply Company. So their numbers speak for themselves. I think they've kind of almost doubled revenue in the last 5 years, which I think is incredible. And they've driven this outstanding customer loyalty program. But that customer loyalty program wasn't big bang. This was a slowly iterative approach that took years to finely tune with the data and insights they were gaining. So it's a really great example of, a really successful retailer in what is arguably, one of the niche sectors, particularly, in the UK. But it's a great example of where they've tested, learned, grown incrementally into something that, is a really fundamental part of their business now.
Yeah, that's a great example too, because tractors would have been the first thing that came to mind for me. Can I ask you, as a little bit of a diversion before we get to your next one, are you seeing any what you would call effective use of chatbots? As part of these strategies, I've yet to really have, I think, really meaningfully good experiences interacting with bots on like websites and such, either for service or sales. Have you found any useful scenarios yet?
So I do see a need for chatbots, but I feel like there has to be an understanding of where the limit of a chatbot is. And I feel like sometimes retailers try and push the boundary too far. And I feel like where a chatbot is effective is redirecting the query in the right direction, first of all. And I think that's where they can be used really well. So things like Facebook Messenger, a lot of retailers will interact with that, where it might not be a customer service agent, but it's a chatbot. But what they will do is redirect your query in the right direction if it can't help you with the basic things. So things like order number lookups, things like that is great. But where it can redirect your query to the most effective person, that's where it works really well, in my opinion. So I think understanding the limit of your chatbot and how far it can go, I think is great. Where I have seen almost a chatbot is that voice recognition when you phone in. So particularly kind of not necessarily in retail, but in financial services institutions, you phone up and you say, what are you looking for help with today? I've actually seen that voice recognition. I'm sure there's funny stories of, sorry, sir, what did you say from previous days before? But actually now that's actually working a lot better as well in terms of, again, having that experience, capturing those first bits of customer insight before then redirecting them to the right person. So that's a good example of where it does seem to be improving.
Got it. Okay, let's see the next on your list.
Okay. This might be a bit more buzzwordy for you, John, but we'll see.
Uh-oh.
We'll see what you think.
Yeah.
So, strategic transformation is still possible.
Okay. Get ready for strategic transformation. So what do you mean
Yeah.
by strategic transformation then?
So, by strategic transformation, I mean working towards a long-term goal or strategy, whilst through whether that's a transformation project or through a transformation program. Now, before COVID, I still thought the theory of 3 to 5 year transformation programs were a thing of the past. COVID has certainly proven that now, given the uncertainty of where we're heading in the next 12 months, launching these massive 3 to 5 year transformation programs just aren't sustainable. But certainly something we've been doing at BJSS in the last kind of 6 months or so is still helping retailers with the strategy of how do we deliver short-term, incremental, iterative growth in a safer environment that's still trying to achieve that strategic vision. And I think there's a real way of doing that. We're starting to find out Agile is at its core, in my opinion. So really those short-term learning development cycles are really important in that way. But there's still a way that you can do that in a way that you can change direction. I'm not going to use the word pivot because I know you don't like it. Change direction in short terms as and when, customer behaviors change, the environment changes, circumstances change, but you're still heading towards that strategic vision or goal. Because I think without doing that, you are just kind of, treading water and not making any advancements, which is not sustainable.
Yeah, thanks for not overdoing it on the word pivot there. I appreciate your consideration there. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I tend to agree with you, especially in the context of your previous remark, because you took the position that in the long run these transformations were going to happen regardless of COVID. So if you kind of take that on deck, that we're essentially accelerating towards the same approach, then why not be strategic about that, right? And in my mind, to your point, what is necessary, however, is much more like, I think the big problem with these long transformation initiatives in the past were there wasn't nearly enough focus on this notion of continuous improvement and delivery, either technically making that possible from a technical architecture standpoint or from a customer service standpoint or anything else, because like there has to be some quick wins along the way. And I think that's really what got neglected, right? So I might be building a bigger platform, but I might be redoing my whole website, but I better have a mobile app out there right now where I can add features every week and where I can enhance the experience constantly and where I can point to growth of market share constantly. So I think to me, that's the balance, is how can you do both?
100%. And you could almost argue that actually those transformation programs shouldn't be happening at all. And you should be in a constant state of improving and, that agility and, looking for the next thing and testing the next thing. And it's not just, we are now on this transformation program for the next 3 years. And at the end of these 3 years, we'll have achieved this. It's actually, what we are in a constant state of evolving and responding to customer requirements and the change in environments and the change in lockdowns. And that's how we operate as a company moving forward, which is, in terms of uncertainty, obviously, a massive headache for C-suites and CFOs. But at the same time, that's what's going to make you most adaptable and most agile to those changing circumstances and therefore most successful.
So in the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about this notion of the vaccine economy we've been talking about on Diginomica, where there's a new economy that coming, or that we're kind of stepping into, that's not a return to normal, but there are some encouraging signs, but it invokes additional sort of safety concerns and data concerns that have to come along with that, as far as making people feel safe but respecting their data. Is that similar to how you look at this year?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that again, that data privacy and that kind of safety theme transfers the whole of retail, whether that's kind of your in-store, whether that's your personal data, and that's something that's really, really important to people moving forward. So retailers are going to have to be very honest, open, and transparent for all elements of safety, whether that's in-store, whether that's what they do with your data. Obviously, we've seen the change in how cookies are operated, and I'm sure we're all annoyed by having to click accept all or reject all every time you go on a new website. But all that kind of transparency has to come through, and customers now will relate to people who they share the same values with. And whether that's honesty, whether that's transparency and security, that's how, if there is still brand loyalty out there, that's how you will obtain it.
Okay. All right. Let's see your next one.
Number 2.
Here we go.
So it's something we've touched on a little bit, but rethinking the role of the store. So like I said at the beginning, John, those traditional metrics of kind of sales per square foot, I think are a thing of the past, and just kind of measuring the stores on the number of products you sell to the customers that walk in, I just don't think they really work anymore. So I think you've got to really start thinking about your store as wider than just kind of, product purchasing. There's obviously, we've spoken about things like click and collect. We've spoken around that kind of inspiration piece. And there's almost that role of almost being a dark store. So literally coming somewhere you can browse, you can inspire, and then you can ship out as well and do that fulfillment side. So it's almost, and I saw it, and it's a bit of a buzzword of, rather than sales per square foot, it's experience per square foot. So what is it per square foot of your store that you are offering in terms of customer experience, whether that's browsing, click and collect, fulfillment, all those different areas, and really rethinking that. So I think that's a really, really important thing of how does that store fit in as part of your overall offering that is beyond just selling products.
Yeah, and isn't there some interesting scenarios here? Because I think, like in our NRF every year, I would try to go to retail store tours in Manhattan and see these new storefronts and these boutique retailers offering really interesting experiences in their stores and collecting different merchants under one roof and all these different things. Nespresso with the store where you could not only like get supplies in a machine, but you could sample coffee, right? Like, so you like that, but then you think, gosh, it's so different if you were an established brand and you have this huge storefront fingerprint or whatever, and now you're going to have to go through some pain. Like, so to your point, there is a store, but like if you have a huge footprint of storefronts, that could be painful. I'm going to be watching Starbucks in particular because, I think they're going to have to change some of their store footprint. Now, how much they're going to have to change, I'm not sure, because some of that has to do with like travel. I do think travel is going to come back. So like, I think the hotel embedded Starbucks are going to be fine, but I'm not so sure about the office embedded Starbucks, because I think some of these corporate office skyscrapers that they thrived upon are not coming back. And so now you have a disadvantage because, to your point, yeah, you can reinvent the store, but it'd be better to do that if you didn't have a storefront fingerprint yet than if you have all these stores out there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, it's the same in the UK. The center of London, kind of zone one, is not really residential. It's purely commercial. So Starbucks have got a lot of stores there, as have, a lot of different retailers. They are seeing footfall, sub 10% compared to what it was last year, purely because nobody's there, and you're still sat there having to pay the mortgage. So I think, as you said, that's a really, tough consideration to have. But I think it's almost like the Apple model. So you look at Apple stores, it's not just about buying products in there. It's about the browsing, the inspiration, the tech geniuses that are in there. So I think it's almost taking that model. Obviously, it's hard to establish that kind of square foot that Apple has, and obviously the budget supporting it. But they're already starting to think about people coming into stores to test the products, pick up the latest iPad, the new iPhone, and have a look at it. And then maybe you go to your mobile contract provider and you buy it through them. But Apple still benefits from that as well. So what is that store in terms of a showroom, in terms of an experience, and all those different things, again, that actually purchasing is just kind of a byproduct of all of that.
So LinkedIn user, he knows he's being bad here because he knows that blockchain is outlawed on my show. So first of all, that's a terrible blockchain use case, because blockchain's about transparency, and I don't want my customers to see what my other customers are getting, and I don't think customers would be very happy seeing what other customers are getting either. And also have a look at some of the recent news stories about how much ridiculous energy the current Bitcoin blockchain is consuming, and think about that from an efficiency and cost standpoint. So I totally reject that. However, I do think we haven't discussed enough loyalty programs and just the role of that, because I think that's an ever more powerful factor in retail, right? Is the loyalty initiatives. So
100%, and that has diversified so much in the last 5 years. Before it used to be, dollars off your next purchase or collecting points, all that kind of stuff. But actually now what we're seeing, and the most effective loyalty programs, again, coming back to point number 5 on here, was partnerships. So, using that loyalty program to, get your free Starbucks coffee, get your free cinema tickets, get your, money off your gym membership. That's the broader loyalty program that people will go for, because it's a lifestyle loyalty program rather than being, a really isolated and siloed loyalty program. So those ones which are diversified are great. And I think they're going to continue to move forward, because that's the lifestyle and that kind of lives with the customer rather than a very binary relationship, which you have with traditional loyalty programs.
Indeed. Okay, I think we got one more. Let's see your
last
number
but by no means least, which I think is, to be honest, a bit of a summary of everything we've kind of talked about, John, which is don't tread water. So I think what we've definitely seen in the last 12 months, and particularly in the first kind of lockdown, is retailers kind of just doing enough to stay afloat. So, cutting off the arms to save the body and all that good stuff. What that means is, unfortunately, is you just bleed to death very slowly. And that's what we're seeing with retailers. So just kind of shutting up shop, putting your head down and hoping to kind of trudge through it and survive out the other side just isn't the way to do it. We've talked about, Amazon not destroying retail, but driving that forward. They're going to continue to innovate. They're going to continue to drive forward. And if it's not Amazon, then it's somebody else. And the key thing for me is uncertainty shouldn't mean inactivity. And that's the key thing for me. Then we talk about that innovation, the test and learn. There's so many different things you can be doing that aren't, multi-million-pound transformation programs. Requires a bit of clever budget allocation, and you can still make progress forward. Because I think treading water, doing enough to survive, particularly kind of 12 months after the pandemic started, that's just not something you can do. So hopefully everything we've spoken about in the last hour are many different things you can do not to tread water. That isn't just, fronting up millions of dollars for a big investment.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like this is not a retail example, but there's this band I kind of like called Scars on 45. They're kind of a modern take on Fleetwood Mac, but this cliche around like musicians got their legs cut out for them with touring and stuff, which is totally true. But what they started doing is Zoom concerts, right? Which have been surprisingly good. And they do all these things where like you can like pay for a private encore, for additional money and have a song sung like just for you on the Zoom, and there's some other stuff you can get like autographed set lists and things like that. But the point being, like, I just think is so interesting is like, well, I'm sure for a while they were just kind of devastated by, okay, we're screwed. We can't tour, blah, blah, blah. But then there was this creative response that kicked in. And I think that's kind of, I think what, silver lining is not the right word, but that's kind of what is interesting about this time is the chance to have a creative response. And certainly applies to retail.
100%. And look, definitely the first, 2 to 6 months, everybody was in a bit of shock and a bit of kind of a WTF and where do we go from here? But it's been a year now, and, we have to start making strides moving forward, because if you don't, somebody else will. So it's time to stop treading water and really crack on with whatever you decide to do.
Yeah. I wanted to just get back real quick to social commerce and also this sort of next generation of consumers. And, I think there's been a lot of talk that this next generation is kind of values oriented and they want to do business with companies that share their values and stuff. How much stock do you put in all of that? And some of that can be a little cliche.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit hard when you're not necessarily one of them. I'm millennial, not Gen Z, unfortunately. But I do think there is some validation in there, but I think it comes back to that point of personalization. There are many different ways to skin a cat, and it's not just going to be about the alignment of values. There's going to be other different things that attract them. So when we talk about, they spend hours on TikTok, the Instagram one click, the shopping with friends, the live streaming shopping with social influence. There's lots of different things there. It's not just about that values piece. It is, of course, massive, but if you also provide, that frictionless, that kind of shop anywhere that Thomas mentioned before, those kind of things are also incredibly valuable to people. So I do think there's legs in that, and I do think that generation do have that, but there's also some other key priorities for them, which is kind of, that mobile commerce and kind of live streaming.
Yeah, and a LinkedIn user says you're being polite by having a sip of water. It's Friday, and you should be having a pint, bro. Well, we're almost done, so Jake can probably have a pint if he wants in just a few minutes.
It's actually 10:30 here as well, so a busy week of work. The temptation to have one between work and now has been killing me.
Yeah, and Jake's been an awesome sport by staying up late, as is our LinkedIn user here who's on your time zone. So
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see Clubhouse in the context of social commerce? I don't know if Clubhouse has commercialized their model enough yet for that, but it's interesting.
It is, and I think how all these good platforms land is by the customer acquisition to begin with. TikTok wasn't about buying and selling originally; it was about these really short snippets of consumable content. So Clubhouse goes that way. I'm not necessarily sure it will. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's that. I feel like it's more of that kind of inspirational, educational community piece. But it's still so new. I only started hearing about it about 3-4 weeks ago. So there's still a lot for it to do before it gets there, I think.
What one interesting trend too around data that I sent you a few kind of ripped from the headlines things from my PR inbox. The other interesting thing was about the shift of first party data. And this is like a B2C thing more, but like how third party data is becoming more and more heavily regulated and locked down. And even the notion of the cookie is potentially going to change over time. And so it was interesting to think about that trend also, about how brands, they mentioned brands like Clorox and Procter and Gamble, Chipotle and Peloton both introduced loyalty programs in their apps. The NFL using quizzes to interact directly with the consumer. Another interesting trend, right? Like basically figuring out how to earn consumer trust directly. I mostly welcome it because I think a lot of these third-party data models of like leveraging data off of partners and stuff were kind of sleazy. So I think it's better, but it's interesting.
It is, and again, that's the toss-up between using third-party partnerships, either for that reach, for that immediate growth, for that innovation. But on the flip side, actually, now you're going to start to not have access to that data, which is why you see so many brands go down the straight loyalty program like Peloton, for example. But again, for the consumer to give their data away now, they're going to want to see the benefit of that. So what are you doing with my data that makes the experience better for me? And again, it comes back to that transparency piece. So if you're collecting my data to know that when you send me my next polo shirt, it's going to fit perfectly, that's fine. If you're sending it so that when I'm, on YouTube and I'm going to get an advert in the corner, I'm not going to be too happy about that. So again, it's being transparent. What you use my data for and how is it benefiting me, not you?
Yeah, and the final thing, which in my weekly enterprise hits and misses columns, I talk about the whiffs of the week. Things I might have to call a whiff on the American consumer on this one. I got some data that just was really shocking to me. It was from Shogun, and they surveyed 2,000 U.S. based consumers about their online and in-person shopping habits. 2,000 is not a huge sample size for a consumer survey, but it's not small. Get this data point. 83% of Americans said they'd risk getting COVID-19 to purchase something in person rather than online, even when the product's available online and price and quality equal. I sent the PR people a note saying, I find this to be an alarming and confusing stat. And I said, I would like to get an idea for why people are willing to risk their lives for a product they can get online. I said, I would like to think that naivete and ignorance around COVID-19 is part of this, because that would make sense, right? If you didn't understand like COVID, then maybe you'd be more willing. But then they sent back something saying that the vast majority, more than 90%, were aware of the risks, but were still doing it, and yet substantial portions were still willing to shop in person, and not just for like things like obvious important things like I have to see the product in person for some reason. But things like 30, a little more than 30% didn't want to pay shipping costs. And I was just like, oh my God, like I don't understand the American consumer. I just cannot get it. So anyway, I just think what it goes to show you is like, and this is just one survey, so I'm not going to generalize too much, but it goes to show you that I don't think we know exactly what's going to happen in the coming months. I just don't think we know.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. It's that uncertainty. And I know you mentioned whiffs, John. So I actually discovered one myself today. And I know I've been very nice to Amazon today. So it's probably worth calling them out. And I'm not sure you've heard about it.
Yeah, please.
Amazon Explore. So I'm not sure if I came across it today when I was doing a bit of homework on this, and they're kind of providing like live stream virtual experiences. But it just shocked me when you could have a 45-minute virtual tour of Central Park for $63. I'm just not sure I'm not sure that's something I would pay for, to be entirely honest. But yeah, you can watch cooking courses on there. You can do tours of all these different cities. But yeah, I thought $63 for a tour of Central Park wasn't something that maybe would tick the boxes. So yeah, potential whiff for me. And because I've been so nice to Amazon today, it's good to call out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested in these virtual tours. There are a couple on my calendar, but I haven't looked at the pricing yet. And I'm like, because yeah, I mean, like doing a tour of like the Sistine Chapel right now kind of sounds sort of fun. But I guess it would really depend on price as to whether I would really go in for that or not. So you make a really good point. I don't know if you saw a while back, but I did this one around how there's this growing demand for flights to nowhere.
Yes.
People who miss flying so much that they want to just get on a plane and take off and then like land again and go home. Now, to be fair, a lot of them incorporate sightseeing, so it's not just like getting on a plane and stuff. But I just like love that. It's like, I don't know about you, but I said, well, if I'm not going to travel, I'm going to enjoy not traveling. I'm not going to like drive to my airport and ask if I could sit in a plane for a few hours.
No, and I think I would rather repurpose that money elsewhere as well, and save it on the travel, and either save it or spend it on something for the house or something else. So yeah, not my cup of tea, but I appreciate people who enjoy that stuff.
Yeah, evidently there's a bit of a market for it. And hey, to your point, if you have inventory, if you have planes sitting around,
why not?
Yeah. So anyway, just to finish out this little anecdote around the PR and COVID and in-person shopping and consumers being willing to, risk their lives and those of their family to save on shipping costs. More than 30% said they would. I said, wow, so interesting, especially given you asked about the COVID-19 risks. So there is some risk awareness. I find it amazing folks are willing to do that. I said, granted, some folks are not as high a risk, but I have to believe there must be some ignorance on the part of those surveyed as to how complicated and bad it can get, or that you can infect your relatives so easily. But it's amazing to prioritize convenience over risk to yourself and your loved ones. I said, I'm astonished. And I'm waiting for a response on that one. So, but they're just the messenger. They're just relaying this data. But what a data point, huh? I mean, I was not expecting that.
No, I know. I mean, convenience is obviously something we've spoken about, and having it right here, right now is really important. And why wait, a day or 2 days for it to be delivered and pay $5 when you can walk down the street and get it? I understand that, but in the COVID environment, yeah, maybe. But yeah, 1 in 3 people, I don't know. Maybe that feels right. I don't know. You know the American public better than I do, John. So I'll let you call that one.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit. I'm a little bit astonished, but I guess I really shouldn't be at this point. But I do live here after all. But having said that, putting those astonishing numbers aside, I do think that people are absolutely factoring that type of stuff in. At least in every place that I've been or seen, they're taking all those things into account. They might not make the exact same decisions because I think the survey data that would make more sense to me would be data that showed that we have different levels of risk tolerance, which I think is true. And obviously that's going to become more dramatic as more people get vaccinated and such, right? And as testing gets better, we'll see more and more of that. One interesting little retail note, Jake, is that NRF has an in-person show planned.
It's huge.
Yeah. So that's talk about a retail gut check. That's a really good one. I already emailed them and I said, you won't see me there because I just know I won't be ready to go to in-person show in June, but it will be interesting to see if they can actually carry that off. I don't think it will be a massively attended show, but I'll be very curious to see if they can pull it off.
Yeah, it won't be a Javits size show, I don't think. And like you said, that international audience, which is one of the best pieces of NRF, personally, I think, you get a lot of South Americans, a lot of Europeans, and a lot of Brits coming over, which I think is the real essence of the whole thing. So yeah, appreciate they want to get a show down, but I won't be jumping on a plane across the Atlantic in June, I don't think. Let's aim for January 2022 instead.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like a better target. But I've written about this before, and we don't need to have a long conversation about this tonight. But I do think eventually we may see some hybrid scenarios where you have a smaller regional on the ground thing that's buttressed by a larger virtual event. But it will be interesting to see if NRF actually carries that off in June. They're putting a strong front on it right now, but I think they have to. But I do really wonder about that one. But anyway, you and I won't be there, so we won't be able to do our catch up podcast. but it's been great to get your views on all things retail. I think this was an excellent conversation. Viewers, if you have any final things, you better ping it in a sec. So what trends and projects are you still do a lot of projects right now? So are there any sort of goals you have for the year, what you're trying to accomplish, or?
Yeah, so I guess we kind of mentioned NDA, so I can't mention too much about the client. But actually, when I was talking about delivering those real kind of short-term incremental benefits towards a wider strategy, that's something I'm actually working on with a large retailer at the moment in the UK. So obviously delivering remotely, which has its own challenges, but it's really exciting that I've been there a couple of months now, and we're going to hopefully see it through this year. So I'm really excited to. We've talked about the theory of, delivering these short-term agile benefits while trying to achieve long-term objectives. Now we're living and breathing it and really helping a client deliver it across 3 or 4 products. So really excited to keep pushing on and really prove that this works and can deliver real value.
Well, it's cool to hear that you have a lot of project work despite the remote aspect of it. And for folks that are kind of wondering, why Jake was so on his game today, it's because they've been doing a ton of projects. And so you've been talking with retail customers day in, day out. So that's where all this stuff on the board came from. But what didn't come from surveys or anything that came from your projects. So made for a great conversation.
It's been great. It's been really good.
Excellent. Well, listen, now you can go have your beer. Thanks for the audience comments as always, and we'll catch you next week. I got another interesting guest coming. Thanks a lot, Jake. We'll catch you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.